I'm Austin Carty, and I am the pastor at Boulevard Baptist Church here in Anderson.
Now, why in the world did you come to Anderson, South Carolina?
I'm delighted to be in Anderson, South Carolina. When we first began conversation with Boulevard, it seemed like the kind of church community that we wanted to serve. Anderson seems like the kind of community that we want to be living in and involved in. Wonderful schools for our children to go to, a committed civic structure. It's the size of a city that we wanted to live in. It's back closer to home for both my wife April and myself. So really, if we were to put on paper the kind of community that we wanted to live in and the geographical location we wanted to live in, Anderson is right there, checking off all those marks. So I'm originally from High Point, North Carolina. My wife is from Hendersonville, North Carolina, just barely an hour down the road. And we were in Corbin, Kentucky, which is in the southeastern corner of the state. We were there a little over 4 years at a wonderful church, First Baptist Church there in Corbin. And what happened was I had a friend in the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship who knew that ultimately April and I would like to land somewhere a little bit closer to Hendersonville, particularly in upstate South Carolina. And they knew about Boulevard's opening and reached out to me and said, this is a church you might want to look at. And so I did, and loved everything that I saw, loved the way the church presented itself, loved its history of engagement with the local community and the mission-minded orientation that the church has. Loved the way that the church worships. It's very similar to the style of worship that I like to lead. And so the church looked really good from what we saw. So I reached out to a few mentors who knew a little bit more about the church, who all said, yeah, this is a great church with a great history. You'd do well to apply to this church. And with each passing conversation with the representatives of the church, the more it seemed like this was the place to be. So I did my undergrad at High Point University. I worked for a while as a freelance writer. That doesn't mean I was successful. It just means that I was barely paying the bills by being able to write. I taught high school English for a few years, and it was actually while teaching a Leo Tolstoy short story that I felt the call to ministry. That's a much longer
That makes perfect sense to me, actually.
And you know, a lot of people ask you when you're a pastor, when did you receive your call to ministry and what did that look like? And when I answer, well, I was teaching a Leo Tolstoy short story, people tend to look at me very strangely. That's not the answer that people tend to get when asking that question, but it's my experience.
There's some other things that have been told about you. Let's talk about Survivor.
Yeah, sure.
When were you on Survivor, and let's talk about what happened there.
Oh, in a whole different lifetime.
What made you want to be on Survivor?
Well, if I'm being honest, the reason I wanted to be on Survivor was that I wanted to win $1 million, and I wanted to be on television. I was 24 years old. In so many ways, I was a completely different person then. But it was a wonderful experience. It feels like, in some ways, I dreamed that experience. It was 39 days of, well, for me, it was 21 days of being out on an island, starving, being eaten alive by bugs. And then the next thing you know, it was over, and it was on television, and I look back on it now as a wonderful, wonderful memory. And I'm always happy to talk about the show. I don't often bring it up unless somebody knows about it. One of the things about being a minister who was on Survivor is that if people know about it, you spend the next 3 years trying to not be the pastor who was on Survivor. It's nice to first be the minister and find out, oh, he was on Survivor. It usually doesn't work in that sequence, but I did have a wonderful experience with the show, and so anytime anybody wants to ask me about it, I always love to talk about it.
Is it different than it's portrayed on the final cuts and all?
It's not really. Obviously there's editorial work that goes into the show, but that's not the same as editorial manipulation. They've got 72 hours of real-time footage for every 42-minute episode they put together. So obviously you have to condense what you have, and you're trying to tell a story at the same time. But my experience, and I can only speak for my one season, but my experience was that everybody was pretty much portrayed as they came off on the island. Those who complain about their edits, and across all seasons there are that. At least from my own experience, those who complain about their edits might not have a whole lot of self-awareness of what they were like on the island itself. But otherwise, it's like what you see. It's here's what I always say: it's as close as you could ever simulate the experience of being stranded on an island. You're not going to die, but the starvation's real, the exhaustion's real, and it's a really, really wild experience.
And so after you're voted out, you just have to stick around until it's all over? Is that sends you?
Yeah, so when you're voted out of the show, then you're taken to a location where you're held. And if you're on the jury, which I was, then you come back every 3 nights to be a part of that, because ultimately you're in the group that votes on who wins the show. I was told that a woman, a delightful woman who was on my season, named Ruth Marie, is originally from Anderson.
She is, yeah, the Tollies.
Yeah.
So I Tolly furniture downtown, yeah.
I didn't know that,
Okay.
and I haven't spoken to Ruth Marie in, goodness, 15 years, but she was wonderful. So right when all this began in earnest with Boulevard, when we accepted the candidacy for the position, right at that time, our 3rd child, our son Whit, was born. So it's been a very hectic 11 weeks at our house. So to find more about Boulevard Baptist Church, you can go to boulevardbaptist.com, or you can find the Boulevard Baptist Church information on Facebook as well. We would love to have people come out and worship with us on Sunday mornings. You can join us. Sunday school starts at 9:15, and worship services are at 10:30.